Hey guys, tonight we're in medieval Europe, and the sun went down hours ago. It's the kind of darkness we don't really experience anymore. No streetlights, no phone screens, no distant glow from cities. Just complete darkness that lasts 12 to 16 hours depending on the season. You're lying on straw in a small house, listening. Wind moves across the thatch roof above you. Timber settles in the walls as the temperature drops. Outside, a dog barks twice, then stops. These sounds are louder in darkness, sharper, and you're paying attention to all of them. The fire in the corner has burned down to coals. The room smells like smoke and wool. Your family sleeps nearby, their breathing steady and familiar in the quiet. The wooden bar across the door is solid, heavy oak that you lifted into place before lying down. It's the same routine every night. Bar the door, say your prayers, lie on your right side, and wait for sleep while darkness does whatever darkness does outside. For centuries, bell ringers climbed church towers during storms to ring consecrated bells. The practice was dangerous. Lightning struck towers regularly, but they kept doing it because the community needed those bells ringing. The tradition was so important, it lasted generations, continuing even centuries after the medieval period ended. That tells you something about how seriously medieval people took darkness, not just as an inconvenience, but as something requiring active defense, layer after layer of it, every single night. This is what we're exploring. Not why medieval people feared darkness, but what they built to survive it. The systems they created, personal to communal to spiritual, that turned 16 hours of vulnerability into something manageable. Because they did manage it. Every single night for 1,000 years, from roughly 500 AD to 1500 AD, medieval Europeans faced this darkness and found ways to endure it. Earlier today, before sunset, you were in the village square. The curfew bell rang just as the sun touched the western hills. That sound meant you had maybe 15 minutes to get home. Everyone knew it. Merchants folded their stalls quickly. Mothers gathered children. The blacksmith secured his forge. Within minutes, the square emptied. Not panic, just practiced urgency. Get home. Get inside. Before darkness makes the streets dangerous. You walked quickly through narrow streets that were already filling with shadows. The air was getting colder with each step. Other villagers moved in the same direction, everyone flowing toward their own doors. Nobody lingered. Nobody stopped to chat. There was an understanding, unspoken but absolute. Daylight was for community. Darkness was for survival. You reached your door, stepped inside, and immediately the preparations began. The door itself is thick oak, reinforced with iron bands. You lift the bar from where it rests against the wall. The wood is heavy, about as long as you are tall, worn smooth from years of handling. You position it across the door and slide it into the iron brackets on either side. The sound it makes when it settles into place is solid, final. That bar makes the door almost impossible to force open from outside. You push against it once to test. It doesn't move. This is how every household secures itself at night. Your wife is getting the children ready for evening prayers. Your father banks the fire, covering the coals with ash so they'll burn slowly through the night without wasting wood. Your mother checks that the shutters are latched from inside. Everyone has a role in this evening ritual, tasks that have been performed the same way for as long as anyone can remember. The routine is comforting in its familiarity. You've done this every evening of your life. Through the small window, before your mother latches the shutter, you watch the last light fade. The sky goes from blue to deep purple to black. It happens faster than you'd expect. One moment you can still make out the shape of buildings across the street. The next moment, nothing. Just darkness, complete and absolute. This is what you'll be living in for the next 14 hours. Right now, in late autumn, the nights are long. Your eyes don't adjust the way they would to dim light. There's nothing to adjust to. On a cloudy night like this, with no moon visible, you literally cannot see. You've tested it before. Hold your hand directly in front of your face and move it closer. Nothing. No shape, no shadow, no difference between your hand and the empty air. Your eyes, built for daylight hunting and gathering, are useless in this darkness. But your hearing sharpens. Every sound seems amplified. You hear your father's breathing across the room. You hear mice moving in the thatch above you. You hear wind pushing against the walls, finding gaps in the daub, making the whole structure creak and settle. Outside, somewhere in the village, you hear a shutter banging. Someone forgot to latch it, and now it's knocking against the wall with each gust of wind. You wonder briefly if they're awake, listening to it, or if they're sleeping through it. The darkness changes how you perceive distance and threat. That dog that barked earlier could have been 3 streets away or right outside your door. The sound carries differently at night, bouncing off walls, distorting. You can't trust your ears completely, but they're all you have. So you listen carefully, sorting through sounds, trying to determine what's normal and what might be dangerous. The priest tells you every Sunday that darkness is more than just the absence of God's light. It's its own force. During the day, divine light keeps evil spirits contained and weak. But when the sun sets, those constraints lift. Demons grow stronger in darkness. They can move more freely, act more boldly. This isn't just one priest's opinion. It's church teaching, consistent across every village and city in Europe. Darkness is the domain of spiritual danger. Your mother told you stories when you were young. Shapeshifters that wait for night to abandon human form. The wild hunt that rides across the sky on certain nights, collecting souls. Fairies that steal children from cradles. The dead that walk. You're older now, and you understand these are tales meant to teach caution. But you also know that people disappear sometimes. Travelers go missing. Children die unexpectedly. And these things always seem to happen at night, which makes the stories feel less like fantasy and more like warning. The physical dangers are real enough without adding supernatural threats. Thieves work at night because darkness gives them cover. They move quietly from house to house, testing doors and shutters, looking for anything left unsecured. If they find a way in, they take what they can. If someone wakes and confronts them, violence follows. Your neighbor was beaten last winter when he tried to stop someone stealing from his workshop. The thief escaped in the darkness. Nobody saw his face. He's probably still in the village, someone you pass in the market, but you'd never know. Fire is another constant worry. Houses are built with thatch and timber, materials that burn easily. A single spark can consume a building in minutes. Your neighbor's house burned 2 winters ago. It started in the middle of the night. By the time people noticed the flames, 3 houses were involved. 4 families lost their homes. 2 children died in the smoke. The darkness made it impossible to see the fire until it was too late to stop it. This memory surfaces every night before you sleep, a reminder of how quickly safety can vanish. If something bad happens tonight, help isn't coming. Your neighbor lives 20 feet away, close enough that you can hear him cough sometimes through the wall. But in darkness, that distance becomes unbridgeable. Calling out for help would attract attention from whoever or whatever is prowling outside. Leaving your house to seek assistance would expose you to the danger you're trying to escape. So each household faces the night alone. Any crisis that begins after sunset lasts until dawn. This knowledge shapes everything about how you approach sleep. It's not relaxation, it's managed vulnerability. You're gambling that whatever dangers exist tonight will pass by your door and find someone else. The odds are generally in your favor. Most nights pass without incident, but not all nights. And you never know which kind of night this will be until morning comes. You understand these threats clearly because you've lived with them your entire life. Physical danger from criminals and animals. Economic disaster from fire or theft. Complete isolation if crisis strikes. Spiritual attack from forces the church says are real and hostile. All of these risks activate the moment the sun disappears. Your awareness of them isn't paranoia. It's realism. The fear you feel lying here in the darkness is proportional to the actual danger you face. But medieval people weren't helpless. That's the part that's easy to miss when you only focus on the fear. Yes, they were afraid. Yes, the dangers were genuine. But they didn't just huddle in darkness hoping for survival. They built systems. Comprehensive, layered systems that addressed every level of threat they could identify. Personal preparations, household defenses, community organization, spiritual protection. each layer designed to compensate if another failed. You've already performed your personal rituals tonight. Before lying down, you said your evening prayers. The words came automatically after a lifetime of repetition. Upon your right side I me lay, blessed be I with Jesu Christ. The position matters as much as the words. Lying on your right side protects your heart. It's what everyone does, what everyone has always done. This prayer and this position form your first layer of defense, preparing your body and soul for the night. The bar across the door represents the second layer, household fortification. Your home isn't just shelter, it's a defensive position. That heavy oak bar makes forced entry nearly impossible. The shutters are latched from inside. The fire is managed to provide heat without risk. Every physical aspect of your house has been designed with nighttime security in mind. These aren't luxuries. They're necessities that every household maintains regardless of wealth. Outside, you hear footsteps and a voice calling. The night watch is making his rounds, announcing the hour. His voice carries through the darkness, loud and deliberate. You don't know if he's actually patrolling every street or just walking the main routes, but hearing him matters. It means someone is out there, maintaining order, watching for threats. This is the third layer, community defense, protection that extends beyond what any single family can provide for itself. From the church tower, you hear bells, not the curfew bell from earlier, but the regular evening bells that ring at set hours throughout the night. The sound is clear and somehow reassuring. Those bells have been consecrated. They've been blessed with holy water, anointed with oil, given Christian names. The church teaches that their sound has power against spiritual threats. This is the fourth layer, spiritual warfare waged on behalf of the community by the church itself. These four layers work together. If you forget your prayers, the door is still barred. If the watch falls asleep, your household defenses still function. If your faith wavers, the physical protections remain effective. The system is resilient because it acknowledges human weakness and plans for it. Medieval people built redundancy into their defenses because they knew perfection was impossible and failure in any single layer couldn't be allowed to become fatal. The night stretches ahead, 14 hours until dawn. You've survived every previous night, and you'll probably survive this one too. The probably is important. It's not certainty. The systems reduce risk but don't eliminate it. The darkness is still out there. The threats are still real. But the architecture of protection, the layers of defense, the collective effort of personal ritual and household security and community vigilance and spiritual power, all of it combines to tilt the odds in your favor. In the church tower above the village, the bell ringer sits in the cold stone chamber. He'll ring the hours throughout the night, marking time for everyone sleeping below. If a storm comes, he'll ring even harder, calling on the power of those consecrated bells to break whatever forces ride the thunder. He knows the danger. Bell ringers have died doing this for centuries. Lightning doesn't distinguish between the righteous and the unfortunate. But the work continues because the alternative, leaving the community undefended, is unthinkable. That's what this night is really about. Not fear for its own sake, but the response to fear. The comprehensive architecture that medieval people built to transform overwhelming vulnerability into something survivable. They took darkness seriously in ways we've forgotten. They understood it as a genuine threat requiring genuine defense, and they created systems, refined over generations, that actually worked. We're going to walk through each of those four layers in detail. Personal rituals, household fortifications, community watches, spiritual weapons. You'll understand why each piece mattered and how they fit together. You'll experience one complete medieval night, from curfew bell to dawn. And maybe you'll recognize something in their approach that's been lost in our modern assumption that darkness can simply be eliminated rather than respectfully endured. The wooden bar across your door is solid. The fire glows faintly in its bed of ash. Your family sleeps nearby. Outside, the darkness continues whatever it does. And you close your eyes, trusting in the layers of protection that have kept your people alive for 1,000 years. The medieval night has fully descended, and somehow, despite everything, you'll survive it until morning comes. The first layer of protection against medieval darkness began with your own body and soul. Before any door was barred or watch was posted, you prepared yourself. These weren't superstitions, though modern eyes might see them that way. They were practices developed over centuries, refined through experience, and taught from parent to child as essential survival knowledge. Personal rituals that made the difference between restless terror and manageable sleep. Evening prayers formed the foundation of this personal defense. Every household performed them, regardless of social class or wealth. The words varied slightly by region and family tradition, but the core remained consistent. You spoke directly to God and the saints, asking for protection through the vulnerable hours ahead. The prayer you learned as a child goes like this: Upon my right side I me lay, blessed be I with Jesu Christ. Some families added more, invoking specific saints or naming particular threats to ward off. The length didn't matter as much as the consistency, every single night, without exception. The act of speaking these prayers aloud served multiple purposes. Theologically, you were placing yourself under divine protection, creating a spiritual barrier around your sleeping form. Psychologically, the familiar words provided comfort and structure to the transition from wakefulness to vulnerability. The routine itself became protective, a mental anchor in the uncertainty of darkness. Your voice saying these words, your breath forming them, created a small sphere of agency in a situation where control was otherwise minimal. The timing of evening prayers mattered significantly. You didn't pray randomly during the evening or wait until you were already lying down exhausted. The prayers came at the threshold moment, right as daylight ended and darkness took over. This was the transition point, the moment when the world changed its rules. By marking that transition with prayer, you acknowledged the shift and prepared yourself for it. The practice recognized that nighttime required a different state of mind than daytime, a different kind of alertness even in sleep. Children learned these prayers as soon as they could speak. Parents taught them with the same seriousness they taught children not to touch fire or wander away from home. This wasn't religious education in the abstract sense, it was survival training. A child who forgot their evening prayers was corrected immediately, because the consequences of forgetting were understood to be severe. The prayers had to become automatic, something you could recite even when exhausted or sick or distracted by worry. The position you slept in was equally important and equally universal. Everyone slept on their right side, not randomly, not based on comfort or preference, always the right side. The reasoning came from both medical theory and spiritual belief. Medieval medicine taught that the heart was located on the left side of the chest. Sleeping on your right side meant your heart was positioned upward, away from the ground, protected by the rest of your body. This was thought to keep the heart safer from harm, both physical and spiritual. The spiritual significance of right-side sleeping ran deeper. The right side was associated with righteousness, with God's favor, with the correct path. Christ's wounds during the crucifixion were emphasized on his right side in religious art and teaching. By sleeping on your right side, you aligned yourself symbolically with Christ's suffering and sacrifice. You placed yourself in the proper position to receive divine protection. The left side, conversely, was associated with sinister forces, with wrongness, with vulnerability to evil. Sleeping on your left side was thought to expose your heart to spiritual attack. This sleeping position was so ingrained that people maintained it even when uncomfortable. If you woke during the night on your left side or on your back, you corrected it immediately. The movement became automatic over time, your body adjusting without full consciousness. Travelers sleeping in unfamiliar places still maintained the position. The sick, lying in pain, still tried to keep to their right side. The dying were positioned on their right side by family members, ensuring they faced death in the proper posture. Modern sleep science has accidentally validated one aspect of this practice. Sleeping on your right side does reduce pressure on the heart and can improve circulation. Medieval people didn't have the anatomical knowledge to understand why this worked, but centuries of collective experience had taught them that it did. The spiritual explanations they attached to the practice were the framework available to them for understanding something they knew worked without knowing the mechanism. Personal amulets and consecrated objects formed another layer of individual protection. These varied more by region and family tradition than prayers or sleeping position. Some people kept small relics near their sleeping place, fragments of cloth or bone said to have touched saints. Others relied on holy medals blessed by priests, small pieces of metal stamped with religious imagery that could be worn or kept under the pillow. Dried herbs gathered on specific holy days and blessed by the local priest were sewn into small pouches and hung near the bed. One common practice involved consecrated wafers. The priest would inscribe protective prayers or saints' names on communion wafers using blessed ink. These wafers were then distributed to families, who would consume them over 3 days, while reciting specific prayers. The consumption spread across 3 days was deliberate, creating a sustained period of internal protection. The blessed wafer inside your body was thought to create a barrier against spiritual harm, protecting you from within while other measures protected from without. The tactile nature of these objects mattered as much as their spiritual power. In absolute darkness, being able to reach out and touch something solid, something known to have protective properties, provided psychological comfort. Your hand could find the amulet hanging near your head. Your fingers could trace the shape of the holy medal under your pillow. These physical anchors helped manage the fear that came with not being able to see anything at all. Families passed down specific protective objects through generations: a grandmother's blessed rosary, a father's saint medal that had protected him through dangerous travel. These objects accumulated meaning through their history. They'd protected previous generations successfully, which meant they had proven power. The weight of that history added to their effectiveness. You weren't just relying on blessed objects in general. You were relying on this specific rosary that had kept your grandmother safe through 50 years of nights, this particular medal that had brought your father home from pilgrimage. The psychological function of these personal defenses shouldn't be dismissed as mere placebo effect. The terror of medieval night was real. The threats, both physical and perceived spiritual, created genuine anxiety that could prevent sleep entirely. Lying awake in darkness for 14 hours, heart racing, jumping at every sound, would have been unsustainable. The personal rituals and objects provided a framework for managing that anxiety. They gave you specific actions to take, specific protections to rely on, specific reasons to believe you'd survive until dawn. The consequences of neglecting personal defenses were understood to be serious. If you forgot your evening prayers, you corrected it immediately, even if you'd already lain down. If you woke and realized you'd rolled onto your left side, you repositioned. If your protective amulet had fallen or been misplaced, you found it before trying to sleep. These weren't casual suggestions, they were requirements. And everyone knew stories of what happened when requirements weren't met. The stories about forgotten protections usually involved restless nights, bad dreams, or waking with unexplained marks or pains. More serious stories, passed down through generations, told of those who deliberately rejected the protections out of pride or skepticism and suffered for it. The traveller who refused to say his prayers and disappeared during the night. The wealthy merchant who mocked the need for blessed objects and lost his mind to nightmares. These cautionary tales reinforced the importance of consistent practice. The beauty of personal defenses was their accessibility. Rich and poor alike could say prayers. The words cost nothing. Sleeping position required no resources. Even blessed objects, while they might be more elaborate for the wealthy, were available to everyone through the church. A poor peasant might have only a simple wooden cross blessed by the parish priest, while a noble might have an expensive reliquary with authenticated saints' bones, but both provided the same fundamental function. Personal protection scaled to every economic level. This democratic nature of personal defense created social cohesion around the practices. Everyone, from the highest noble to the lowest serf, performed the same basic evening rituals. They all said their prayers. They all slept on their right sides. They all kept blessed objects near their beds. Shared vulnerability created shared practice, which reinforced the social importance of the rituals. If everyone did it, it must be necessary. And because it was necessary, everyone did it. The personal defense layer was also the most intimate and private. What happened inside your mind as you said your prayers? How much comfort you drew from your blessed objects? Whether you truly believed in their power or simply went through the motions out of habit and social pressure, these were things only you knew. The external performance was observable and enforced by social expectation. But the internal experience varied from person to person, and that privacy was important. Your personal relationship with these protections was your own. Over a lifetime of performing these rituals, they became deeply ingrained. The prayers came without thought. The right side position felt natural. The presence of protective objects became expected, their absence noticeable. This habituation was actually part of their effectiveness. When something becomes automatic, you don't have to spend conscious effort on it. You can perform your protections even when exhausted, anxious, or distracted. The ritual carries you through without requiring decision or willpower. The first layer of defense, these personal preparations, set the foundation for everything else. A person properly prepared in body and soul could then rely on household fortifications with greater confidence. A household of properly prepared individuals could contribute more effectively to community defense. And personal spiritual protection aligned you with the larger spiritual warfare the Church waged on behalf of everyone. The layers built on each other, starting with the individual. As you lie here on your right side, prayers said, protective objects near at hand, you've completed your part of the defensive architecture. You've done what you can with your own body and soul. The next layers involve your house, your community, your church. But this first layer is yours alone, your voice speaking the prayers, your body positioned correctly, your hand reaching out in darkness to touch something blessed. These personal defenses are the foundation everything else builds on, and they've been performed this same way by millions of people for hundreds of years. That continuity is itself a kind of protection, knowing you're part of a practice that has survived countless nights and kept countless people safe until morning. Personal preparation protected your body and soul, but it couldn't stop a thief or keep out the cold wind. The second layer of defense transformed your house itself into a fortress. Every element of medieval domestic architecture, from the doorway to the windows to the materials used in construction, reflected the reality that your home needed to be defensible. This wasn't about wealth or status. Even the poorest peasant cottage incorporated features designed specifically for nighttime security. The threshold was the most critical point in any medieval home. Not the door itself, but the threshold, the boundary between inside and outside. This space held significance that went beyond the physical. In medieval thinking, thresholds existed in a liminal state, belonging fully to neither the interior world nor the exterior. They were in-between places, and in-between places were dangerous. Spirits and evil forces were thought to gather at thresholds, testing boundaries, seeking entry. This belief shaped how thresholds were constructed and protected. Most medieval doorways were built deliberately deep, creating a recessed entry rather than a flat surface. You didn't step directly from the street into your home. You stepped into a transitional space, a small area that was technically inside the doorframe but still separated from the main living area. This architectural feature served practical and symbolic purposes. Practically, the depth provided additional protection against wind and rain. Symbolically, it created a buffer zone where the transition from outside to inside could be properly ritualized. Threshold markings were common across medieval Europe. Small crosses carved into the doorframe, protective symbols painted above the entrance. In some regions, specific stones thought to have protective properties were embedded in the threshold itself. Iron, which was believed to repel harmful spirits, was frequently used in threshold construction. The hinges on your door weren't just functional metal. They were protective iron, placed strategically at the boundary point where protection mattered most. Certain times of year required additional threshold protection. On All Hallows' Eve, when the barrier between the living and dead was thought to be thinnest, families performed specific threshold rituals. Some scattered blessed salt across the doorway. Others placed fresh rowan branches above the door. In Sweden, gold or silver troll crosses were painted on doorframes to ward against supernatural threats. These weren't permanent fixtures, but temporary reinforcements applied when the danger was believed to be highest. Crossing the threshold required mindfulness, especially after dark. You didn't rush through doorways at night. You paused, often touching a protective symbol or whispering a brief prayer. This moment of deliberate transition served psychological and spiritual purposes. Psychologically, it marked the shift from the vulnerable exterior world to the defended interior space. Spiritually, it invoked protection at the exact point where evil forces were thought to be most active. The door itself represented the primary physical barrier. Medieval doors were substantial, built to withstand force. Oak was preferred for its strength and density. The wood was thick, often 3 or 4 inches, and reinforced with iron bands running horizontally across the surface. These bands weren't decorative. They prevented the wood from being split or splintered by axes or heavy impact. The construction of a door could take a skilled craftsman days or even weeks, and a well-made door was passed down through generations as a valuable inheritance. But the door's strength mattered little without an effective locking mechanism. This is where the bar system became essential. Every medieval household, regardless of economic status, secured their door with a heavy wooden bar. The bar rested in iron brackets mounted on the interior walls on either side of the door frame. When you were ready to secure the house, you lifted this bar and positioned it across the door, sliding it into the brackets. The weight of the bar, combined with the leverage of the brackets, made forced entry from outside nearly impossible. These bars were substantial pieces of wood, typically as long as the door was wide, plus the depth of the brackets on each side. For a standard doorway, that meant a bar roughly 6 to 7 feet long. The wood was dense hardwood, usually oak or ash, thick enough that it wouldn't break under impact. A proper bar weighed 30 to 50 pounds. Lifting and positioning it required strength, which meant that securing the house was often a task for the strongest family members. The sound of the bar sliding into place had meaning that went beyond the physical. That solid thunk of wood settling into iron brackets signaled the completion of the transition from day to night mode. The house was now sealed. Whatever happened outside would stay outside. That auditory confirmation was psychologically important. In darkness, where you couldn't see the bar to verify its position, the sound told you the job was done correctly. Many people tested the door after barring it, pushing against it to feel the resistance, confirming that the bar was properly seated. The bar system's effectiveness came from basic physics. When someone tried to force the door open from outside, the pressure pushed the door against the bar, which pressed into the brackets, which were anchored into the stone or heavy timber walls. The force was distributed across the entire system rather than concentrated at a single point like a lock. Breaking through required either destroying the door completely, which would take considerable time and noise, or somehow dislodging the brackets from the walls, which was nearly impossible without interior access. Windows presented different challenges. Glass windows were rare in medieval homes, limited to churches and the homes of the very wealthy. Most people had window openings with wooden shutters. These shutters closed from the inside and latched with simple wooden or iron mechanisms. The shutters themselves were solid wood, thick enough to block wind and provide security. Some households had shutters reinforced with iron bars or bands similar to doors. The size of window openings reflected security concerns. Windows were deliberately small, just large enough to allow light and air during the day. Narrow window openings served multiple purposes. They reduced heat loss during winter. They made it nearly impossible for an adult to climb through, even if shutters were somehow breached. And they limited the amount of external darkness that could, metaphorically, enter the home. This last reason might seem superstitious, but it shaped practical building choices. Smaller windows meant less psychological vulnerability to the exterior night. The placement of windows also considered security. They were rarely at ground level in the front of buildings facing streets. Most were higher up or positioned toward the back where they faced enclosed courtyards or family land. This positioning reduced the risk of someone approaching a window unnoticed. If your window faced your own courtyard, you'd hear anyone trying to access it because they'd have to cross your property first. The hearth fire served multiple defensive functions beyond heating and cooking. Fire was understood as purifying, both in practical and spiritual senses. The flames consumed impurities. The smoke drove away insects and small vermin. The light pushed back darkness, creating a sphere of visibility in the otherwise black interior. And spiritually, fire was associated with divine light, an earthly echo of God's illumination. Maintaining the hearth fire throughout the night was considered a protective act. Banking the fire required skill and care. You couldn't leave flames burning freely all night. That would consume too much wood and risk setting the house ablaze. Instead, Before sleep, you buried the coals under a layer of ash. The ash insulated the coals, slowing their burn rate while maintaining enough heat to keep them alive. A properly banked fire could last 8 to 10 hours, providing steady warmth without active flames. In the morning, you'd brush away the ash and add small kindling to bring the fire back to life. The sound of a fire, even a banked one, was comforting in the darkness. The occasional small crackle or pop broke the silence in familiar, non-threatening ways. These sounds were known, expected, safe. They provided acoustic markers that the household's heart was still functioning. A completely silent house felt more vulnerable than one where the fire occasionally reminded everyone of its presence. Sleeping arrangements in medieval homes reflected defensive thinking. Families slept in groups rather than separate rooms. This wasn't just about limited space, though that was certainly a factor. Sleeping together meant mutual awareness and protection. If one person woke to a concerning sound, others could be roused quickly. If someone fell ill during the night, help was immediately available. The collective sleep arrangement transformed individual vulnerability into group vigilance. Beds, when families could afford them, were often enclosed or partially enclosed. Bed curtains weren't just for warmth or privacy. They created a smaller, more defensible space within the larger room. Drawing the curtains around your bed at night created a psychological boundary, a final inner layer of protection. Some beds were built as boxes with wooden sides and a top, essentially a small room within a room. These enclosed sleeping spaces felt safer because they limited points of potential intrusion. Animals frequently shared sleeping quarters with families, particularly during winter. Cows, goats, pigs, and chickens might be kept in the same structure, usually separated by a partial wall or located in a lower level if the house had a loft arrangement. This practice served multiple purposes. The animals' body heat helped warm the living space. Their presence meant your economic resources weren't left unguarded in a separate structure, and animals served as an early warning system. Livestock reacted to disturbances before humans might notice them. A cow suddenly shifting or a chicken squawking could alert sleeping family members to potential danger. The vertical arrangement of medieval homes often placed living quarters above ground level, with storage or livestock below. This elevation provided security advantages. Access to the living space required navigating stairs or a ladder, adding another barrier to entry. The family sleeping above could hear anyone attempting to access the lower level, and the psychological comfort of being elevated, even slightly, above the ground level where threats moved made sleep easier. Every material choice in medieval home construction considered nighttime security. Thick walls of stone or tightly packed timber and daub didn't just provide insulation. They muffled sounds from outside, reducing the acoustic anxiety that came from hearing every movement on the street. They created a solid barrier that took significant effort to breach. The thickness of walls varied by economic means, but even the poorest cottages had walls substantial enough to provide real protection. The roof was another consideration, though less obviously defensive than doors or windows. Thatch roofs were common and practical, but they were also vulnerable to fire. Families understood this risk and were careful with any flame or spark. Some homes included internal features designed to reduce roof fire risk, like stone chimneys that vented smoke without allowing sparks to touch the thatch. Others positioned cooking fires away from directly under the thickest thatch. The concept of home as fortress permeated medieval consciousness. Your house wasn't just where you lived, it was your primary defense against a hostile night. Every family invested as much as their means allowed in making that defense effective. The poor might have simpler materials and fewer protective symbols, but the basic principles remained constant. Strong door with a bar, secure shutters, maintained fire, sleeping arrangements that allowed mutual protection. These weren't luxuries, they were necessities that shaped how homes were built and how families functioned within them. The household fortifications represented a significant escalation from personal defenses. Your prayers and proper sleeping position protected your soul. The house protected your body and your family. These physical barriers were something you could see, touch, and verify. You could test the strength of the bar. You could check that shutters were latched. You could watch the fire glow. This tangibility provided psychological comfort that purely spiritual defenses couldn't match. The combination of both personal ritual and physical fortification created a comprehensive defensive posture. As you lie in the darkness, you're aware of these fortifications surrounding you. The bar across the door, the latched shutters, the walls at your back, the fire glowing faintly in the corner. These aren't abstract protections. They're solid, real, physical. Your house has been transformed into a defended position, and you're inside it, protected by wood and stone and iron. The household fortifications have done their job. The night can test the defenses if it wants. The defenses will hold. Personal rituals protected your soul. Household fortifications secured your body and family. But neither could address threats beyond your door or provide rescue if your defenses failed. The third layer extended protection into the collective realm, creating networks of mutual vigilance and organized response that transformed isolated households into defended communities. This layer acknowledged a fundamental truth. Survival in medieval darkness required cooperation. The Night Watch represented the most visible element of community defense. Armed men patrolling streets and calling out the hours. The practice was so widespread across medieval Europe that it became standardized through law. In England, the Statute of Winchester in 1285 codified what many towns were already doing informally. The statute specified that towns must maintain watches with specific numbers. 6 men at gates, 12 in boroughs. These weren't suggestions. They were legal requirements backed by penalties for communities that failed to comply. The watch rotated among able-bodied men in the community. Every household contributed members to the rotation based on their capacity. Wealthy households might hire substitutes to fulfill their obligation. Poorer households sent sons or fathers who performed the duty themselves. The rotation ensured that the burden didn't fall disproportionately on any group, and that the watch always included locals who knew the community, the people, the normal patterns of nighttime activity. Watchmen carried specific equipment that identified their role and enabled their function. A staff or cudgel for defense, a lantern or torch to create mobile light, a horn or bell to raise alarm if needed. The light they carried was practical, illuminating their immediate surroundings as they walked, but it was also symbolic. That moving point of light represented order and authority moving through chaos and darkness. Seeing a watchman's lantern bobbing along a distant street provided reassurance to everyone lying in darkened homes. The hourly calls were perhaps the watch's most important function psychologically. Throughout the night, at regular intervals, watchmen called out the time and condition. Midnight and all is well. 2 o'clock, and cold, but clear. These calls served multiple purposes simultaneously. They marked time's passage, giving sleeping families a sense of progression toward dawn. They confirmed that the watch was active and present. They provided acoustic proof that the social order persisted despite darkness. And they broke the oppressive silence that made every other sound seem threatening. The specific phrases used in hourly calls varied by region and city, but they all shared common elements. State the hour, assess the conditions, provide reassurance. Some included religious elements, invoking God's protection or naming saints. Others were purely functional. The consistency mattered more than the exact wording. Families grew accustomed to hearing these calls at expected times. If a call was missed or delayed, people noticed and worried. The regularity of the watch calls created a rhythm to the night, transforming formless darkness into measured segments. But the reality of the night watch didn't always match the ideal. Watchmen were human, subject to human weaknesses. Historical records and contemporary accounts reveal that watches often failed in their duties. Watchmen fell asleep in sheltered corners. They gathered together for warmth and company rather than spreading out to patrol effectively. They drank ale to ward off cold and boredom, which impaired their alertness. Some accepted bribes to look the other way. Others simply went through the motions, calling hours without actually patrolling the areas they were supposed to monitor. Communities were aware of these failures but maintained the watch system anyway. Imperfect protection was better than no organized protection at all. Even a partially effective watch deterred some crime and provided some response capability. The psychological value of hearing the hourly calls persisted regardless of whether the watchman was performing perfectly. And occasionally, the watch did fulfill its ideal function, catching criminals in the act, responding to emergencies, or raising alarm when needed. Those successful interventions justified maintaining the system despite its regular shortcomings. Curfew enforcement represented another critical community defense mechanism. The word curfew comes from the French couvre-feu, meaning cover fire. Originally, curfew referred to the time when households had to cover their fires for the night to prevent accidental blazes, but the meaning expanded to encompass a general prohibition on being outdoors after dark. When the curfew bell rang at sunset, everyone was expected to be inside their homes within a short grace period. The enforcement of curfew varied by location and circumstances. Some cities treated curfew violation as a serious crime with severe penalties. Being found on the streets after curfew without legitimate reason could result in arrest, fine, or in extreme cases, execution. This wasn't arbitrary cruelty. It reflected the belief that anyone outside voluntarily after dark was either up to no good or dangerously foolish. Legitimate reasons for being out existed. A physician summoned to a birth, a messenger carrying urgent news, someone pursuing a fleeing criminal, but these exceptions required verification and often official documentation. The concept of the night walker emerged from curfew culture. A night walker was someone who habitually violated curfew, who chose to be outside in darkness. The term carried criminal implications. Night walkers were assumed to be thieves, prostitutes, or other malefactors. The category itself was an offence in some legal codes. Simply being identified as someone who walked at night could bring prosecution, even if no specific crime was proven. This legal framework reinforced the social norm that darkness was for sleeping, not activity. Curfew created a social contract. Everyone withdrew from public space at the same time. This universal withdrawal meant that anyone encountered in darkness was either violating the contract or operating under special exemption. It simplified threat assessment. During the day, distinguishing criminals from honest people required judgment and observation. At night, the distinction was simple. If someone was outside, they were suspect. This clarity made community defense more effective, though it also created hardship for those with legitimate nighttime needs. The watch and curfew systems worked together. The watch could enforce curfew by challenging anyone found outside. Those challenged had to provide acceptable explanation or face consequences. This gave watchmen clear authority and guidelines. They didn't have to investigate complex situations. They just had to identify who was outside and determine if their presence was authorized. The simplicity of this system made it maintainable even with imperfect watchmen. Beyond official watches and curfews, communities developed informal mutual protection networks. Neighbors paid attention to each other's households. Unusual sounds from a neighboring house prompted concern. Extended silence from a usually noisy household might warrant checking in the morning. This wasn't nosiness or intrusion, it was survival strategy. Your neighbor's security and well-being affected your own. A fire in their house could spread to yours. A thief successfully entering their home might target yours next. The vulnerability was shared, so the vigilance was shared. Some communities organized their mutual protection more formally. Neighbor groups agreed on specific signals, a certain pattern of knocks or calls that meant danger versus help, needed versus all is well. Shared walls between buildings included deliberate acoustic channels, gaps in the stone or timber that allowed sound to pass more easily, enabling neighbors to hear if distress occurred next door. These architectural features were intentional, designed into buildings to facilitate mutual awareness. The positioning of houses reflected community defense thinking. Buildings were often constructed close together, sometimes sharing walls, creating continuous facades along streets. This density served defensive purposes. Fewer gaps meant fewer approaches for criminals. Continuous building faces created natural barriers. The spaces between buildings, when they existed, were narrow and controlled, easier to monitor than wide-open gaps. The medieval streetscape wasn't accidental. It was shaped by security requirements. Gates in walled towns represented another community defense layer. After curfew, gates closed and were barred from inside. Gatekeepers controlled access, admitting only those with legitimate business and proper authorization. The Watch concentrated forces at gates because they were both the strongest defensive points and the most vulnerable to organized assault. A city with closed gates and manned watches could exclude external threats effectively. The walls and gates didn't just keep armies out, they kept nighttime threats at bay. Torchlighting in wealthier districts created islands of illumination in the darkness. Some cities required households above certain wealth thresholds to maintain lanterns or torches at their doorways during night hours. These lights didn't illuminate broadly, but they created enough visibility in immediate areas to deter some criminal activity and help legitimate travelers navigate. The pattern of lights also revealed which areas had wealth and organization, and which areas were poorer and darker. This visibility gradient influenced where crime occurred and where safety was more likely. Community response to nocturnal emergencies demonstrated the strengths and limits of collective defense. When fire broke out at night, neighbors responded with buckets and attempts to contain spread. When someone called for help, those nearby sometimes responded, though the decision to open doors and venture out was never made lightly. The willingness to break personal security to assist neighbors varied by situation, relationship, and perceived risk. Close neighbors were more likely to help than distant ones. Clear emergencies like fire prompted more response than ambiguous situations. The church bell system extended beyond individual churches to create community-wide acoustic protection. Multiple churches in larger towns meant multiple bells, creating overlapping coverage. The bells rang at set hours through the night, similar to watch calls, but audible to more households simultaneously. The sound of bells carried farther than human voices and penetrated walls more effectively. For those lying awake in darkness, the regular chiming of church bells provided temporal orientation and spiritual reassurance. Bell-ringing schedules were coordinated across churches to ensure continuous coverage without excessive redundancy. One church might ring the hour, while another rang the quarter hours. During storms or special circumstances, all churches might ring simultaneously, creating a wall of consecrated sound against whatever threatened the community. This coordination required organization and communication among clergy, representing another layer of collective effort to protect against darkness. The community defense systems weren't perfect or universally effective, but they represented a significant evolution beyond individual and household protection. They acknowledged that some threats exceeded what isolated families could handle. They pooled resources and rotated burdens so that protection could be maintained continuously. They created social structures that transformed a collection of isolated households into something more resilient. A community that watched together, that enforced collective rules, that responded to emergencies together, survived better than fragmented groups of individuals. As you lie in your bed, you're aware of these community systems functioning around you. You heard the watch call the hour earlier. You know the gates are closed and manned. You trust that your neighbors are maintaining their own vigilance, just as you maintain yours. The church bells will ring again before dawn, marking time's passage and pushing back spiritual threats. You're not alone in the darkness. Your community surrounds you, awake or sleeping, but all participating in the same defensive architecture. The third layer holds because everyone contributes to it and everyone benefits from it. The household fortifications protect you from what's immediately outside your door. The community systems protect the space beyond your door, creating a defended zone where more people can survive the night. Personal rituals, household fortifications, and community watches all addressed threats you could see or at least imagine in physical terms. The fourth layer operated in a different realm entirely. Spiritual warfare engaged forces that medieval theology taught were real, powerful, and actively hostile to human survival. This wasn't metaphor or superstition to medieval people. It was cosmology. The actual structure of reality and darkness was when the spiritual war became most intense. Church bells formed the primary weapon in this spiritual arsenal. Every church had at least one bell, larger churches had multiple, and their function went far beyond simply marking time or calling people to services. Bells were understood as active instruments of divine power, capable of disrupting and repelling demonic forces. The sound of consecrated bronze ringing through darkness was believed to physically push back evil, creating zones of protection in the acoustic radius of their reach. The process of creating a church bell involved ritual that transformed ordinary metal into something sacred. Bell founding was itself a specialized craft requiring both technical skill and spiritual preparation. Once cast, bells underwent baptism ceremonies similar to those performed for human infants. A bishop or senior priest presided over the ritual, which included washing the bell with holy water, anointing it with consecrated oils, and giving it a Christian name. The bell became, in a sense, a member of the Christian community, an ensouled object with its own identity and divine purpose. Inscriptions on medieval bells reveal their understood function. Many carried phrases like fulgura frango, meaning I break lightning, or demones ango, I torment demons. These weren't decorative flourishes, they were declarations of the bell's specific powers and purposes. The inscriptions were often in Latin, the sacred language of the Church, adding another layer of spiritual potency. The words themselves, combined with the blessed metal and the consecrated sound, created a comprehensive defensive instrument. The theology behind bell power drew from multiple sources. Scripture referenced bells in priestly vestments and temple worship. Church fathers wrote about sound as a manifestation of divine order, capable of disrupting chaos. Medieval thinkers understood that demons, as fallen angels, retained some angelic nature, including sensitivity to holy things. Just as demons couldn't touch consecrated hosts or cross thresholds marked with blessed water, they recoiled from the sound of baptized bells ringing in God's name. The practice of ringing bells during storms specifically targeted the belief that demons rode thunderclouds. Thunder was understood as either demonic roaring or the sound of spiritual combat between angels and evil forces. Lightning represented weapons in this aerial warfare. By ringing consecrated bells during storms, the Church actively entered this combat, adding earthly divine power to angelic forces. The bells were meant to scatter demons, weaken their cohesion, and protect communities from whatever malevolence they carried. Bell ringers understood they engaged in dangerous work. Towers attracted lightning naturally, being tall structures with metal bells at their peaks. Ringing during storms meant climbing into the most lightning-vulnerable place at the most dangerous time. The dedication required to do this, generation after generation, reveals how seriously the spiritual threat was taken. Death by lightning was terrible, but leaving the community spiritually undefended during demonic assault was worse. The fact that this practice continued for centuries beyond the medieval period itself demonstrates its deep cultural embedding. When bell ringers between 1753 and 1789 died performing this duty, they were maintaining a tradition rooted in medieval understanding of spiritual warfare. The medieval cosmos didn't disappear immediately with the Renaissance or Enlightenment. It persisted in practices that communities felt kept them safe, regardless of what changing intellectual fashions suggested about superstition and reason. Multiple bells in a community created overlapping fields of spiritual protection. Each bell had its own acoustic range, and together they wove a sound barrier over the settlement. The largest bells, with deeper tones, carried farther and were thought to have proportionally greater power. Smaller bells filled gaps, creating continuous coverage. During maximum threat situations, all bells rang simultaneously, producing a cascade of consecrated sound that left no space unprotected. The timing of bell ringing through the night served both practical and spiritual functions. Regular hourly ringing marked time and provided reassurance, as discussed with community systems, but the spiritual function was equally important. The regular pattern of bell sounds maintained continuous pressure on demonic forces. Evil couldn't gather strength in the silence between bell sounds because the silence never lasted long enough. The acoustic environment remained hostile to demons throughout the hours of darkness. Monastic vigils represented professional spiritual warfare conducted on behalf of entire societies. Monks and nuns maintained prayer schedules that covered all hours of day and night. The night offices, matins and lauds, occurred during the darkest hours when spiritual danger peaked. These weren't optional devotions, they were required duties, part of the monastic commitment to serve as spiritual warriors for Christian civilization. The physical demands of night offices were significant. Monks woke in the middle of the night, sometimes multiple times, to gather in cold chapels and chant prayers for hours. Sleep was fragmented, never uninterrupted. The sacrifice of normal rest was understood as spiritual combat service. By remaining awake and praying while others slept, monks kept divine attention focused on humanity's vulnerability, maintaining a channel of protection that might otherwise lapse. The prayers chanted during night offices weren't generic requests for blessing, they were specific spiritual warfare operations. Psalms that invoked divine power against enemies, prayers that named demons and commanded their banishment, liturgies that reinforced protective barriers around the Christian community. The language was martial, filled with imagery of battle, shields, fortresses, and divine armies arrayed against forces of darkness. Monasteries were positioned strategically in the medieval landscape, often on hilltops or at important crossroads. Their physical location mattered for spiritual warfare purposes. A monastery was a fortress of continuous prayer, a permanent spiritual beacon that helped anchor protection networks across regions. The bells from monastery towers reached farther and rang more frequently than parish church bells. Monastic communities with resources to maintain larger bells and more complex ringing schedules provided enhanced coverage. The concept of spiritual warfare extended to the material culture of Christian practice. Holy water in fonts at church entrances could be taken home for personal protection. Blessed candles lit during prayer provided sanctified light that was thought to be inhospitable to demons. Consecrated wafers, as mentioned in personal defenses, extended spiritual fortification internally. All of these materials and practices were produced and distributed through church channels, making the church the source and coordinator of spiritual defense resources. The theology of spiritual warfare acknowledged human inadequacy. Personal prayer mattered, but individual humans couldn't match demonic power alone. Household protections helped, but blessed objects derived their power from church consecration. Community efforts created practical security but couldn't address supernatural threats. The fourth layer, spiritual warfare conducted by the church with divine power, was necessary precisely because the other layers, while essential, weren't sufficient against the full spectrum of nighttime dangers. This created a relationship of dependence between laity and church. You needed the church to baptize bells that protected your community. You needed priests to bless the objects that guarded your home. You needed monasteries to maintain prayer vigils while you slept. This dependence reinforced church authority and importance in daily life. The church wasn't just where you attended Sunday services. It was the institution that kept you alive through every night by waging spiritual war on your behalf. The material support communities provided to churches and monasteries partly flowed from recognition of this protective function. Tithes and donations weren't just religious obligations, they were payments for ongoing security services. A well-supported church could maintain bells, pay clergy to perform proper rituals, and resource the spiritual warfare infrastructure. Poor churches with inadequate resources might fail in their protective duties, leaving communities more vulnerable. The pragmatic benefit of supporting the church was clear and immediate, not abstract or deferred to the afterlife. The coordination of spiritual defenses required organization that extended beyond individual parishes. Bishops oversaw networks of churches, ensuring proper bell consecration and maintenance. Religious orders specialized in particular forms of spiritual combat, with some focusing on exorcism, others on protective prayer, others on blessing objects and places. The medieval church functioned as a comprehensive spiritual defense organization, coordinated at multiple levels, from parish to diocese to Rome itself. The fourth layer's effectiveness was, from a medieval perspective, empirically demonstrated. Communities with functioning churches, consecrated bells, active monasteries, and proper ritual observance generally survived. Their existence proved the system worked. When catastrophes occurred, they were interpreted as warnings of insufficient spiritual defense or punishment for spiritual failings, not evidence that the system itself was flawed. This interpretive framework was self-reinforcing, making the spiritual warfare paradigm resistant to challenges. The four layers of protection exist as concepts, systems built and maintained across medieval Europe for centuries. But understanding them abstractly doesn't convey what it actually felt like to live through a complete medieval night. to experience 16 hours of darkness from sunset to dawn, moving through the fears and rituals and small comforts that filled those hours. This is that experience. One complete night in a small English village in the autumn of 1380, following one person through the full cycle from curfew bell to morning light. The curfew bell rings just as you finish haggling over wool prices in the market square. The sound cuts through the afternoon noise and everything shifts immediately. The merchant you're negotiating with nods curtly, accepting your last offer without further argument. There's no time now for extended bargaining. You hand over coins, take the folded wool, and turn toward home. Around you, the square empties rapidly. Stalls fold, livestock are herded, children are called. Everyone moves with the same practiced urgency toward their own doorways. The walk home takes perhaps 5 minutes. The streets are narrow, buildings close together, creating channels of shadow even before the sun fully sets. You pass neighbors heading the same direction. Brief nods but no conversation. The air is noticeably colder than it was an hour ago. Your breath fogs slightly. The wool under your arm will be needed soon for the winter garments your wife is making. You turn onto your street and see your house ahead, smoke rising from the chimney hole in the thatch. Your father is already inside. You can tell from the smoke pattern. He always makes it home early, his age giving him the privilege of leaving the fields before the younger men. You push open the door and step inside. The familiar smell hits you immediately. Smoke, wool, yesterday's bread, the earthy scent of the dirt floor. Your wife looks up from where she's settling your youngest child. Your 2 older children are already in from playing, their faces still flushed from running. Your father sits near the fire, his hands extended toward the warmth. Your mother is checking the shutters, making sure each one is properly latched. Everyone has their evening tasks, and everyone performs them without needing instruction. You set the wool on the shelf and turn to the door. The bar is in its usual resting place against the wall. You lift it, feeling the familiar weight settle into your grip. The wood is smooth from years of handling, worn in the spots where hands naturally grasp. You position the bar across the door, then slide it into the iron brackets. The right side seats first, then you press the left side until it drops into place with that solid sound, the thunk of wood into metal. That sound means security. You push against the door once to test it. No movement. The bar holds. Your wife has gathered the children near the fire. Evening prayers come next, the routine unvarying. You kneel on the packed earth floor, feeling the cold through your woolen hose. The children kneel beside you. Your parents join, making a semicircle facing the small wooden cross mounted on the wall. Your wife begins the prayer, her voice steady and familiar. Upon my right side I me lay, blessed be I with Jesu Christ. The children echo the words, their younger voices blending with your own deeper response. The prayer continues through its verses, asking protection through the vulnerable hours ahead, invoking saints and angels to stand guard while earthly defenses hold what they can. The prayers take perhaps 10 minutes. When they finish, you remain kneeling briefly, the words still settling in your mind. Then you rise, knees protesting slightly from the cold floor. Your father is already banking the fire for the night, using a wooden paddle to push ash over the coals. He's done this for 50 years, his movements efficient and practiced. The ash glows orange where it doesn't fully cover, then dulls as he adds more. The fire will burn slowly now, lasting through the night without consuming too much wood or risking flames that could reach the thatch. Through the small window, you watch the last light fade. The sky goes from blue to purple to black in what feels like moments. Your mother latches the final shutter, and the interior becomes darker. The only light now comes from the banked fire, a dull orange glow that barely illuminates beyond its immediate area. Your eyes will adjust somewhat, but not much. The darkness in here is nearly as complete as the darkness outside. You help your wife arrange the sleeping area, straw mattresses on the floor, clustered together for warmth. The children will sleep between you and your wife, with your parents on the other side. The arrangement is practical, body heat shared. Everyone within arm's reach if someone needs something during the night. The straw rustles as you position the mattresses, and the familiar sound is somehow comforting. You've slept on straw your entire life. The texture and smell are as familiar as your own skin. The children settle quickly, exhausted from their day. Your youngest is asleep within minutes, his breathing becoming deep and regular. Your older two take longer, whispering to each other until your wife quietly tells them to sleep. The whispering stops. You hear them shifting position, finding comfortable arrangements in the straw. Your parents are already lying down. Your father's breathing already heavy and slow. He falls asleep quickly these days, his body tired from a lifetime of labor. You lie down on your right side, the position automatic and unthinking. Your wife settles beside you, her back against yours. The contact is warm and reassuring. You pull the heavy woolen blanket up over both of you. The blanket smells like smoke and lanolin. It's heavy enough to trap body heat, but not so heavy that it's oppressive. You arrange it carefully, making sure the children are covered, then settle into stillness. This is the first sleep, the initial descent into rest that will last perhaps 4 hours. Your body knows this rhythm: sleep until around midnight, then wake naturally for an hour or so, then sleep again until dawn. This pattern has governed your sleep your entire life, and your parents' lives, and their parents before them. It's not insomnia or disturbance, it's normal. The body's natural rhythm in darkness. You close your eyes and let sleep approach. The sounds of the house surround you. Your father's breathing, deep and rhythmic. The occasional small crackle from the banked fire. Wind pushing against the walls, finding gaps, making the structure creak. Outside, you hear a dog bark once, then silence. The darkness is complete behind your eyelids and in front of them. There's no difference. You drift downward into sleep, aware even as consciousness fades that the house is secure, the family is together, the protections are in place. Sleep comes in layers. First, a lightness where sounds still reach you but don't fully register. Your father coughing in his sleep, one of the children shifting position. These sounds exist at the edge of awareness, noted but not concerning. Then deeper sleep, where the sounds fade and dreams begin. The dreams in first sleep are often mundane, replaying the day's events or worrying over tomorrow's tasks. You dream about the wool you bought, about prices and storage, nothing dramatic or memorable. You wake naturally sometime around midnight. The transition from sleep to waking is gradual, not jarring. You become aware of sounds first. The wind has picked up outside. You can hear it more clearly now, rushing across the thatch with a sound like distant water. The fire has burned down further. You can barely see its glow from where you lie. The house is colder than when you fell asleep. You can feel it on your face, the only part of you not covered by the blanket. This is the watch period, the hour or so between first and second sleep. You lie still, listening. Your wife is awake too. You can tell from the change in her breathing. She doesn't speak, and neither do you, but there's a shared awareness. Both of you listening to the night, assessing it, determining if anything requires attention or if the routine sounds are all that exist. From outside, distant but clear, you hear the night watch calling. 1 o'clock and all is well. The voice carries through the darkness, and hearing it provides reassurance. Someone is out there. The community's defenses are functioning. The familiar phrase breaks the silence in a way that makes the silence afterward less oppressive. You settle deeper into the straw, adjusting your position slightly. Your right side has become uncomfortable from hours of pressure. You remain on it anyway, shifting your weight, but maintaining the correct sleeping position. The watch period is strange in its quality. You're awake, but not active, thinking, but not productively. Memories surface randomly. Your childhood, helping your father in the fields. Your wedding day, now 8 years past. Worries about the harvest, about whether the wool you bought was priced fairly, about your mother's cough that hasn't fully cleared. These thoughts drift through your mind without urgency, acknowledged but not dwelt upon. Your wife moves beside you, sitting up slightly. You hear her reach for the water skin hanging on the wall, hear her drink, then settle back down. The small sounds are loud in the quiet, the leather creaking, the water sloshing slightly. Her breathing as she lies back down. These sounds create a map of her actions in the darkness where you can't see anything at all. From the church tower, you hear bells. The sound is clear and pure, cutting through the wind noise. 2 rings, a pause, 3 rings. The pattern identifies which church is ringing and marks the hour in a different way than the watch calls. The bells continue for perhaps a minute, overlapping slightly, creating harmonies and dissonances that resolve into silence again. You've heard these bells every night of your life. They're part of the acoustic landscape of darkness, as familiar as your own heartbeat. The children sleep through all of this. Their breathing remains deep and undisturbed. Children sleep more soundly than adults, less aware of the night's potential threats, less practiced in the hypervigilance that adults maintain even in sleep. You remember sleeping like that when you were young, the complete surrender to unconsciousness. You can't do that anymore. Your sleep now is always partial, always listening, always ready to wake if something changes. You begin to feel sleep approaching again. The watch period is ending, your body ready for second sleep. This one will be deeper than the first, lasting until dawn. You shift one final time, finding the most comfortable position possible in the straw. Your wife's breathing is already slowing, deepening. She's falling back asleep before you. You close your eyes and let yourself follow her down. Second sleep has a different quality than first sleep. The dreams are richer, more vivid, sometimes prophetic or mystical in character. Tonight, you dream of summer, of working in bright sunlight, of warmth and long days. The dream has no narrative, just sensation and imagery. Warmth on your skin. The smell of growing things. Light. The contrast with the winter darkness you're sleeping in makes the dream particularly vivid. Time passes in ways you can't track while sleeping. Hours go by unmeasured. The next thing you're aware of is the change in sound. The wind has died down. The house is quieter now, and through the quiet you hear the watch calling again, 4 o'clock and cold. The voice is hoarse, the watchman sounding tired after hours in the cold. But he's still out there, still calling, still maintaining his duty. You don't fully wake this time. The watch call registers, gets processed as normal and non-threatening, and you slide back into sleep without conscious decision. Your body is warm under the blanket, surrounded by family, and sleep is still the priority. The dawn is still hours away. You descend back into dreams, less vivid now, more like a vague awareness of rest rather than actual imagery. The next time you wake, something is different. You can't identify what at first. The sounds are the same. The temperature is the same. But something has shifted. Then you realize the darkness has changed. It's not lighter exactly. You still can't see anything. But there's a quality to the darkness that feels different than the deep night darkness. Dawn is approaching, still below the horizon, but coming. You lie still, waiting. Your wife is still asleep, as are the children and your parents. You're the only one awake for this transition. Over the next 20 or 30 minutes, the change becomes more apparent. The darkness shifts from absolute black to something slightly less absolute. Through gaps in the shutter, you begin to see the faintest suggestion of grey. Not light yet, but the promise of light. The roosters start. First one, distant, then others responding. The sound cuts through the pre-dawn quiet, announcing what everyone already knows on some level. The night is ending. The birds' calls are loud, insistent, impossible to sleep through. Your father wakes, coughs, sits up slowly. Your mother stirs beside him. The children remain asleep a bit longer, but you know they'll wake soon. From the church tower, the bells ring again, the Angelus marking dawn officially. The sound is joyful in a way the nighttime bells weren't. These bells celebrate survival, the community's endurance through another night. The ringing continues longer than the hourly bells, cascading across the village, announcing to everyone that morning has come. You sit up, feeling the stiffness in your body from hours in one position. The fire has burned very low, almost out. Your father is already moving toward it, preparing to revive it for the day. Your wife wakes, stretches, then reaches to wake the children. They resist at first, burrowing deeper into the blankets, but her gentle insistence gets them moving. You stand and move to the door. Your hands find the bar in the growing grey light. You lift it from its brackets, feeling how your muscles protest the weight after sleep. The bar comes free and you set it against the wall. Then you lift the latch and push the door open. Cold air rushes in, sharp and bracing. You step outside into the dawn. The sky is lighter now, definitely grey rather than black. You can see the shapes of buildings across the street. The village is coming alive. Smoke rises from chimneys as fires are rebuilt. You hear voices, other families beginning their day. Someone is driving cattle somewhere, the animals lowing as they move. The familiar sounds of morning, of survival confirmed, of life continuing. You take a breath of the cold air, feeling it fill your lungs. Your body aches slightly from the night, but you're alive. Your family is alive. The house stood, the protections held. Another night survived. You turn back inside where your wife is coaxing the fire back to life, and the children are arguing quietly over who gets to eat first. Normal domestic conflict made possible by having survived the darkness to see another day. The medieval night is over, and already in the back of your mind, you're aware that it will come again. In perhaps 14 hours, the curfew bell will ring, the sun will set, the darkness will return, and you'll perform the same rituals, rely on the same protections, hope for the same survival. This is the rhythm of medieval life, night after night after night. Fear managed through routine, vulnerability addressed through layered defense, survival achieved through collective effort and individual discipline. You've done it again. You'll do it again tonight. And the night after that. For your entire life, this cycle continues. The descent into darkness, the hours of vulnerability, the careful maintenance of protections, the relief of dawn. Medieval life is this rhythm repeated endlessly, and survival depends on never forgetting that darkness always returns. You've experienced one complete medieval night now, from curfew bell to dawn. The fear, the preparations, the layered defences, the strange rhythm of segmented sleep, the relief when morning finally came. That cycle repeated every single night for medieval Europeans for 1,000 years, generation after generation. And then, something changed. We didn't eliminate the darkness. We just stopped preparing for it in the same way. We traded one system for another, and in that trade, we lost things we're only beginning to understand we need. The medieval approach to darkness was comprehensive and communal. 4 layers of defense, each one backing up the others, each one requiring participation from individuals, families, neighborhoods, and institutions. Personal rituals, household fortifications, community watches, spiritual warfare. The system acknowledged that darkness was dangerous and that safety required coordinated effort across every level of society. No one faced the night alone, even when physically isolated in their own homes. The loss of sleeping position significance is particularly telling. Medieval people slept on their right side every single night because it mattered. The position had meaning, both medical and spiritual. We sleep however we're comfortable, rolling through positions throughout the night without thought. We've gained comfort and lost meaning. The question is whether that trade was entirely beneficial, or whether meaning itself served functions we've dismissed too quickly as superstition. Community watches became police forces. This transformation seems obviously beneficial on the surface. Professional, trained law enforcement is more effective than rotating volunteer watches of exhausted villagers who sometimes fell asleep on duty. Police have resources, training, legal authority that medieval watches lacked. They're a genuine improvement in many functional ways. But the relationship changed from mutual obligation to service provision. Medieval watchmen were your neighbours, people you knew, people who had the same stake in community safety that you had. Police are professionals, often living outside the neighbourhoods they patrol, providing a service rather than participating in mutual defence. This professionalisation created distance between the protectors and protected. You don't know your local police officers the way medieval people knew their watchmen. You don't rotate into the duty yourself. You don't share the burden. You pay taxes and expect protection as a service, and when that service fails or becomes corrupt, you have less direct influence than medieval communities had over their own watch systems. The gain in professional competence came with a loss of participatory community defense. The spiritual warfare layer transformed most dramatically. Church bells still ring in some places, but almost nobody thinks they're fighting demons. The consecrated bells, the monastic vigils, the bonfires on All Hallows' Eve, all of this either disappeared entirely or became decorative tradition, emptied of its original meaning. We don't believe darkness has spiritual dimension anymore. We've eliminated that entire category of threat from our worldview. And with it, we've eliminated the communal spiritual practices that addressed those threats. The two-sleep pattern that medieval people considered normal disappeared almost entirely, and that disappearance created problems we're still dealing with. Medieval people slept in two distinct periods with a natural wake period around midnight. This wasn't disorder. It was biological rhythm in sync with natural darkness. The watch period between first and second sleep served multiple functions. Families conceived children during this time. People prayed, tended to fires, checked on livestock, listened for threats. The waking hour had purpose and was accepted as normal. The midnight wake period in medieval life had psychological benefits we've lost. That hour of quiet consciousness in the middle of the night allowed for reflection, contemplation, connection with family members who were also awake. It was time outside the normal demands of day or sleep, a liminal period where different kinds of thinking happened. We've traded that for the expectation of continuous unconsciousness. And when that expectation isn't met, we define it as dysfunction rather than considering whether the expectation itself might be wrong. Medieval people also understood something we've forgotten about the relationship between fear and community. They were terrified of darkness, certainly, but they were terrified together. And that shared fear created social bonds and mutual obligation. Everyone performed evening rituals. Everyone barred their doors. Everyone contributed to watches. Everyone supported the church's spiritual defense. The fear that could have been isolating became instead a force for social cohesion, because addressing it required collective action. We've individualized fear. Your security system protects you. Your locks secure your property. Your safety is your responsibility, purchased through private measures. This gives autonomy, but removes the social bonds that medieval collective defense created. We're safer in many measurable ways, with lower crime rates and better emergency response. But we're also more isolated, less connected to neighbors, less likely to know who lives around us or to participate in mutual protection. The loss of shared vulnerability means the loss of social structures built around addressing that vulnerability. Medieval neighborhoods were tight-knit partly because survival required it. You knew your neighbors because you might need them and they might need you when darkness fell. Modern neighborhoods, especially in cities, often consist of strangers living in proximity without meaningful connection. We've gained privacy and lost community, and it's not clear the trade improved overall well-being, even if it improved individual safety. We've tried to eliminate darkness through artificial light and failed in important ways. Light pollution affects sleep patterns, disrupts ecosystems, and wastes enormous energy. But more fundamentally, it represents a refusal to accept that darkness has value and meaning. Medieval people understood darkness as necessary, as part of natural rhythm, as time for different activities and different consciousness. We treat it as a problem to solve, an inconvenience to overcome, and in doing so, we've lost the benefits that darkness and its natural rhythms provided. The surveillance state that replaced spiritual protection creates its own problems. Medieval people believed they were watched by God and angels, which was comforting because divine watchers were understood as protective. Modern surveillance is by corporations and governments, entities with their own interests that may not align with individual well-being. We're more observed than medieval people could have imagined, but less protected in meaningful ways. The watching doesn't feel protective, it feels invasive. Medieval people faced their fear every single night with meaning, ritual, and community support. The fear didn't go away, but it was manageable because the response was comprehensive and participatory. We've outsourced our fear to technology and professionals and eliminated the participatory element. This makes us consumers of security rather than producers of it. And that shift changed our relationship to both fear and safety in ways that may not be entirely healthy. The question isn't whether we should return to medieval practices. Obviously, we shouldn't abandon modern security technology or professional law enforcement or electric lighting. But the question is whether we've lost something valuable in the transition, something about communal response to shared vulnerability, something about accepting darkness rather than fighting it, something about rhythm and meaning and mutual obligation that modern individualized solutions don't provide. Medieval people were terrified of darkness, yes, but they were never alone in that terror. The fear was shared, the response was collective, and the survival was communal. They understood that some things can't be faced individually, that some vulnerabilities require group effort to address. And they built systems, refined over centuries, that actually worked at keeping people alive and psychologically functional through the daily terror of 16-hour nights. We've conquered darkness in the sense that we can illuminate it whenever we choose, but we haven't conquered the fear. We've just changed how we respond to it, making that response more individual and less communal. We've traded meaningful ritual for mechanical switches. We've traded community obligation for professional services. We've traded spiritual meaning for secular surveillance. And in each trade, we've gained something and lost something. Maybe the lesson isn't about darkness at all. Maybe it's about how we respond to any shared vulnerability, any collective threat, any situation where individual effort isn't sufficient and community response is required. Medieval people built systems that acknowledged limitation and created resilience through redundancy and mutual support. We build systems that promise individual solutions and create isolation even as they provide security. The bells still ring at sunset in some European towns. Most people no longer know why. The tradition persists as an echo of a time when those bells meant protection, when their sound pushed back genuine threats, when the whole community organized itself around surviving the descent into darkness. The practice outlasted its understood purpose and now exists as aesthetic tradition, beautiful but emptied of meaning. Perhaps that's the perfect metaphor for what we've lost. We have the form, but not the function. We have the technology, but not the community. We have the safety, but not the meaning. Medieval people understood something we've forgotten. Darkness isn't just the absence of light, it's its own state of being that requires respect, preparation, and community. They faced it every night with fear and courage and mutual support, and somehow, despite everything, they survived until morning came. Perhaps there's wisdom in that we could use even now, even with all our lights and locks and professional protection. Perhaps some things are worth facing together rather than purchasing individually. Perhaps darkness, accepted rather than eliminated, has something to teach us.